Okay, so today we begin our discussion of deontology or deontological ethics or Kantian ethics. And this really comes from the writings of Immanuel Kant, who's writing in the late 1770s. And we'll see that this is about as black and white as it gets. So I'm wearing my black and white dress shirt. This is objective as possible. That Kant was a philosophy teacher. He saw some of the issues and problems with virtue ethics, and some others as well that we'll talk about later. So he set himself to kind of fix these problems. He is the epitome of a German Enlightenment thinker, very, very precise. He spends so much time clearly defining his terms that you begin to wonder, wait, why are we defining this again? He focuses on each individual tree, and you don't always lose sight of the entire forest. But he wants to walk very logically. He thinks that part of the problem with virtue ethics is that it's too artistic, it's too subjective. It's not universal enough. Ethics, Kant thinks, should be something that applies to everyone, everywhere, all of the time. Strict rules so that we know what it is that we're supposed to do. So he's going to tie it to reason. He agrees with virtue ethics here. Reason is the thing that separates us from animals, the things that make us unique. However, it's also the thing which unites all of us. It's the universal thing that all humans share, is the capacity to reason, with maybe a couple of exceptions. As we talked before about young children, may not be quite capable of the level of reasoning that it requires to determine that which is ethical and that which is not. There may be some who, even though they are adults, mentally are not exactly adults. So I'm thinking of mice and men, for instance. And notice how, again, children and people whose reasoning capacity may be more like a child, we don't hold them as accountable for their actions as we would anyone else. That we don't think the same thing when reading of Mice and Men about, I believe it's George, about Lenny's actions as we would if George had performed the same actions. Right? We allow some room there because we realize not capable of the same level of reasoning. We'll also see that Kant, in many ways, is going to end up being more Platonic even than Plato was. As I mentioned, back when we did Plato is sort of compromised because not everyone has access to the forms. Kant is going to have something somewhat form-like. And we'll talk about that more in a few minutes. He's going to have something somewhat form-like. But where Kant differs from Plato is that Kant thinks that no one has complete access, but everyone can have partial access, which then means that we can base it upon this, again, for lack of a better term, let's call it the form of goodness. That's Plato's term, not exactly what Kant is getting at, but a similar notion here. That since all of us have partial access to this form of goodness, we don't have to compromise and make decisions based upon intentions and also some results. We can go all in on pure intentions. Because Kant says, look, when it comes to ethics, shouldn't we be praised or blamed on something that we can control? What can we not control? Results. Results are out of our hands. Intentions, we know the reason that we're doing something. We know intellectually. This is all reason-based. When I'm talking about knowing with regards to deontology, I'm talking about reason. We all know up here what our intention is. We know if we're trying to find a loophole. We know if we're trying to be a hypocrite, if we're trying to make an exception for ourselves. We know what we're doing. And Kant thinks that these rules need to be universal. They can't be based upon culture or something along those lines. And so as you're reading the chapter on deontology, two really important things. One, Ross is not really a deontologist. The first little section of this chapter deals with W.D. Ross. He does not actually fit with deontology because he has this hierarchy of things to value and then has conditions under which you should change the hierarchy. That's not actually deontology, even though it has the word duty in it, and deontology does mean duty-based. It is a very odd placement of W.D. Ross to put him in deontology, simply because he talks about duties. I think there's another theory that fits W.D. Ross much better. So when I'm talking about deontology, I'm not talking about W.D. Ross. I'm talking about Immanuel Kant. Second, really important thing here. So one, Ross not a deontologist. Two, in your readings when it talks about rules and laws and duties, they are not, deontology is not necessarily talking about societal rules and laws and duties. Deontology is talking about ethical duties, moral laws. These are higher than societal anything. Once you tie it back to that societal stuff, you're stuck with cultural relativism again. Deontology thinks that the right thing to do is the right thing to do for everyone, all of the time, everywhere, without exception. Because once you start making exceptions, then that's the slippery slope, it's the domino effect, it's the foot in the door effect. If you're familiar with the story, if you give a mouse a cookie, you know how to avoid all of that plays out in that story? Don't give the mouse a cookie. That's the mouse's foot in the door, so that all of the rest of this stuff plays out. Once you start making exceptions here, and exceptions there, and exceptions there, pretty soon you have no rule. You have no law, ethical or otherwise. Kant is very, very concerned about that. So he's going to be very, very concerned about slippery slopes, about exceptions. He's not talking about character. He's going to be talking about the goodwill, which is something slightly different. He's also not concerning himself with happiness, because again, happiness, too subjective, too open for revision and change. If we're talking about ethics, we have to have something that's stable and unchanging. We can't wake up one day, be a different character, and therefore act differently. That's not right. That's not the way that it should be. It ought to be much more consistent than that. It ought to be something that, regardless of how we feel about it, we will still act ethically. Kant actually will warn against our feelings. If it's something we feel like doing, ooh, that sounds like self-interest now. That sounds too much like emotions, and emotions change too quickly. In some ways, we may be able to determine that which is ethical by determining that thing that we don't want to do. But we rationalize, we can reason through a particular, really scientific method of determining that which is ethical, to determine what our duty is, to do it anyway, even though we don't want to. That's where ethics is. Self-interest is where we want to. Ethics is where we don't want to, but do it anyway. And Kant is very concerned, again, that virtue ethics is too subjective, too artistic, virtuosos, and so on and so forth. So Kant is going to tie it not just to reason. Reason itself is ultimately going to be the arbiter of that which is right and wrong. And we'll see how that plays out. Not only that, but this is the 1770s, 1780s. You look around and which fields of study are making progress? Mathematics, science. Which ones aren't? Art. Art may be changing, but it's not progressing. Ethics, changing, but not progressing. That if ethics wants to progress, then ethics needs to be more like math and science, which again are objective. They're universal. It doesn't matter whether you're in Havana or Manila or Johannesburg. If it's a science experiment, it should be able to be run by anyone and get the same results in all of those places. That's the way ethics should be as well, says Kant. Universal, objective, holds for everyone, everywhere, all of the time, period. Now, allow me to be clear on this point as well. And this is just kind of intro to deontology at this point. Shrapi is not claiming that deontology is Judeo-Christian ethics. Shrapi is telling you Nietzsche thinks that deontology is Judeo-Christian ethics. It's based upon intent, the thing that you can control, the thing that, remember, Nietzsche said you can't even know your own intent. He's skeptical of self-awareness enough that you can know your own intent. He's skeptical of intentions in general. He's skeptical of ethics in general. And what he's really skeptical of, remember what he is writing against, is this concept of God that has all of these rules that you should follow. Rules that you should follow with regards to ethics is exactly what Kant's talking about. Exactly what Kant's talking about. And so these two really are at loggerheads, Nietzsche and Kant. It's interesting to point out, however, that since both of them are doing something meta-societal, it may be difficult for the rest of us to determine why an individual is acting the way that they are. Are they doing it out of self-interest and success, or are they doing it because of some type of higher moral standards that we just aren't aware of? Or are we merely skeptical of their stated intention about these higher ethical standards? An interesting character with regards to this is the Dwight Schrute character from the American version of The Office. Kind of depends upon the episode that you're watching. Some episodes it's much more about personal success. Other episodes it does seem that he really is trying to act on behalf of Dunder Mifflin's best interests, even though no one else seems to recognize it, or no one else seems to agree that this is really what's best for Dunder Mifflin, because everyone else is worried about their own happiness, or their own success, or their own stuff. Deontology is really asking you to take the moral high ground here. There will be no place in the scientific method that reveals duty to us. There will be no place for, but they did this to me. No. That's not here. The right thing to do is the right thing to do regardless of what has been done to you. And it's interesting when I think about universalization, when I think about everywhere around the world, all people, then I think about the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Universal. It is meant to apply to everyone, everywhere, all of the time. And if it doesn't, then you have a human rights violator. It's universal. It's very Kantian. The language itself, even in the particular articles, is very Kantian. Remember, this is black, this is white. Virtue ethics is in that gray. Well, sometimes lie to grandma, sometimes don't lie to grandma. It's up to you and the character you're trying to build, which virtue you're trying to develop right now. No. If you found that unsatisfying because it didn't give answers, deontology may be the ethical system for you, because it's going to give you answers. Now, it may not give you the answers you want, may not give you the answers that you agree with, but it's going to give you answers. With deontology, we're talking about all, none, everywhere, everyone. We're not talking about sometimes, occasionally. That's the foot in the door effect again. That's the exception thing again. And what's interesting, even before I get to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, what's interesting is it seems that with regards to laws and rules and duties, we are all very, very concerned about being the hypocrite or someone else being the hypocrite. Right, so if you were able to find the Big Bang Theory clip I showed you, or I sent out to you and mentioned to you, if you were able to find it, you'll notice the response when Sheldon Cooper was considered to be a hypocrite. Why should we listen to you? You did the same thing. No, that's the most horrendous thing you could possibly call him, is a hypocrite. He is so reasonable, so rational. He seems crazy. And to draw the comparison between something like the civil rights movement and cutting in line may seem ridiculous. But look, Sheldon Cooper here is really invoking Kantian ethics. Injustice is injustice. It doesn't matter to what degree, degrees and balance, and well, this is more important than that, so on and so forth. That's virtue ethics, man. That is not deontology. Deontological ethics is a light switch. It's on and it's off. The end. It's black, it's white. It's right, it's wrong. If it's wrong, then it's wrong. It doesn't matter how grand the injustice is. Injustice is still injustice. From a Kantian perspective, one of the ways in which Sheldon Cooper fell short was he appealed to what people thought. This isn't society-based, because Sheldon's right. Society got it wrong. Society's been so ground down, they don't even realize when injustice is being performed upon them anymore. They've just gotten used to it. That doesn't make it right. People don't determine that which is right. There is line etiquette. There are rules, there are laws, there are duties that come with being in a line. One of those rules, don't cut. Don't cut. Who made him line monitor? Mrs. Wunsch in the 3rd grade. But who makes us ethics monitors? Ethics itself. All of us, if we're not calling out things which are unethical, are complicit in the unethicalness of it. If we're not calling out injustice, we are complicit in that injustice. We have an ethical obligation, a moral duty. It is a moral law, an ethical rule to call that stuff out. Now again, we're trying to get to intentions here because intentions are what's going to count. And the only intention that's going to count as ethical, by the way, is to do it because it is your duty. And we'll see that in a little bit as well. So when seeing an unethical action performed, we need to ask why. Right? What was the intention behind it? And it's interesting that even with regards to actual societal laws, at least here in the United States, you are punished much differently if you premeditated the thing. You can actually be arrested and convicted and imprisoned merely for planning, merely for the intent to perform a particular crime. You don't have to actually perform the thing. The result doesn't actually have to occur. You intended. That's enough. If I intend to cheat on my wife, that's enough. She should be upset with me. Even if I'm too hideous for me to actually follow through with the action because nobody's interested. I still intended. That's enough. We'll need to explore what it means to truly intend something. That's on down the road just a little bit. I just want to read a few of the articles from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 1. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Period. And that pretty well sums up all the rest of these articles. Like, what else do you need? All human beings are born equal. Free and equal in dignity and rights. Boom, done. What you need, once you recognize that, what do you need the rest of this stuff for? Once you recognize that, then that's kind of the heart of ethics, for deontology at least. That's it. Free and equal in dignity and rights. And in many ways, this will be a very rights-based ethical system. We'll see why that's the case in just a little bit. Kant will eventually, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but it pertains here to Article 1. Kant eventually gives 4 formulations of the categorical imperative. Now, what's a categorical imperative? That's the thing that has to do with ethics. Okay? There's a distinction between hypothetical imperatives and categorical imperatives. Remember, this is the 1770s, not the 1970s. The hypothetical imperatives are things that have nothing to do with ethics. Things that are personal, that have to do only with you. Things like the job you choose to go into. Right? It would be ridiculous if we were to universalize that everyone must become teacher. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. Some people should, some people shouldn't, other people do other things. It's great. Variety of people, variety of interests. That's awesome. If you think about college, right? These are your electives. These are the things that have to do with your major, so on and so forth. You don't have to take them. You're choosing to take them. Or everyone in your major has to take them, but not everyone. Just a select folks, a select few, the people who are majoring in this thing. Those are hypothetical imperatives. Hypothetically, if it pertains to you, then you should do these things. But that's not ethics. Ethics is the categorical imperative, the universals that apply to everyone. These are the general education courses that everyone must take, regardless of major, regardless of interest level. You must take this. He's eventually going to give 4 formulations of the categorical imperative. We're going to focus just on the first 2. And just to make you aware, there is some internal debate amongst scholars as to whether these 4 formulations are actually 4 different things or 4 different statements on the same thing. Shrapi happens to be of the latter of these. I will take Kant at his word. These are 4 formulations, 4 different instantiations of the same basic concept. I tell you all that to tell you the second formulation of the categorical imperative. Treat everyone not merely as a means, but also as an end. Why? Because all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and in rights. When you go to the bank, right, the teller has their little name placard. Why? Because people have names. Machines don't. Machines may have IP addresses or something along those lines. They don't have names. The fact that there's a name there indicates to you, the customer, hey, there's a person on the other side here. This isn't just a machine that breathes or has skin. This is a person. They have a name. Be respectful to them. Treat them not merely as a means to get your money into and out of the bank. Treat them also as an end. Have a conversation with them. Engage in pleasantries and chit-chat. That's why you also should refrain from being on your cellular device while with the teller. The banks will tell you it's because of security. The real reason is they want you to respect the bank teller. And if I'm on my phone, I can't even find the thing now. I'll pretend the eraser's my phone. If I'm on the phone when I'm doing business here at the bank, notice I'm treating the person on the other end of the machine more like a person than I am the person that's right here. Grocery store. They have name tags. Why? Same reason. They're people. Restaurants. The servers, the waiters, the waitresses have name tags. Why? Because they're people. At least the few times that my family and I go out to eat. Usually the server even introduces themselves to us. Hello, my name is whatever, and I'll be your server today. They're giving us their name. They're indicating to us, look, I'm a person. Are you going to use me as a means to get your food? Yes, but I am more than that. I am not just a means to get your food. I am also a person with my own ends, with my own goals, with my own capacity to reason, so on and so forth. I'm a person. I'm not a Roomba that happens to breathe. Don't objectify people, basically. Treat people like people, not as things, not as objects. Because here again, slippery slopes, right? Once you start treating the server at the restaurant like a thing instead of a person, you start objectifying them, thinking of them merely as a means for your own ends, then you're going to start doing that with everyone else too. Everyone will merely be an object in your world for your use and possible misuse and possible abuse. People are people. Kant is clear. Look, there's also a role for animals here as well. Animals don't have the capacity to reason. They don't have their own ends. But it does not give you permission to mistreat them. Because if you start treating them merely as objects, if you think that you can mistreat them, then pretty soon you'll start mistreating people too. If you look historically at least, most serial killers started off with animals. Usually small animals, and the animals frequently get bigger, and then suddenly, bam, people. Slippery slopes, domino effect, so on and so forth. But Kant goes on. Not Kant. The United Nations goes on. This isn't even the end of Article 1. So second formulation of the categorical imperative, treat people like people. Don't objectify them. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They, meaning human persons, human beings, are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. But we have reason first and foremost. It's the first on the list. Kant is coming out of, again, this is the Enlightenment, but he's coming out of a long philosophical tradition in the West, primarily. Primarily the West. Which kind of starts with Descartes. You can trace it back a little further. We'll arbitrarily start with Descartes because it's easier. That fundamentally what people are is thinking things. I think, therefore I am. Thinking is proof of my existence. Even if I'm only a brain in a vat being fed information, I'm at least a brain in a vat. The thing that's being fed information is me. It's my reasoning self. It's the thinking thing. I'm a thinking thing. Then everything else. Kant is sort of in that same tradition. That's why it's based on reason instead of something else. The United Nations, what we are, what separates us from everything else, our capacity to reason. We're thinking things first and foremost. It's one of the reasons why there are some critics of this Universal Declaration of Human Rights who claim that it's very Western-centric. But that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother time. Okay? I'm using this merely as a 21st century practical application of Kantian ideas with regards to ethics. Okay? Reason first, conscience comes second. And Kant will even want to talk about conscience as being a reasoning thing. Number 2, everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political, other opinion, national, social origin, property, birth, other status, so on and so forth. A 20th century ethicist, John Rawls, R-A-W-L-S, in his book, A Theory of Justice. And he's not Kantian, but he does have this one thought experiment that really kind of gets a very Kantian point across. Rawls says, look, let's imagine we're starting a society from scratch. We want it to be the best society. We want it to be utopia. And here's the caveat. We have a veil of ignorance. We don't know where in this society we individually will fall. I don't know what race I am, what ethnicity I am, what gender I am, what sexual orientation I am. I know none of that. And I have to, along with other folks, come up with a society, the best society, not having that information about this thing here. Notice how that gets rid of self-interest, because I don't even know what this self is going to be. And the idea is, look, this utopian society, this best of all societies, is going to be much more fair and equitable to everyone. Because no one wants to be in that social strata at the very bottom. And if they are, they don't want that bottom to be very low. So it's going to be much more fair, much more equitable. And I want you to keep thinking about this best world notion. When the World Health Organization comes out with, their top 10 list of happiest countries, it's not really the happiest countries that they're saying it is. There are two very different ways of determining things like this. One of them, very subjective, a very virtue ethics way. Just go ask people, hey, are you happy? And in those, the results turn out to be a bit different than you may expect. Bhutan is usually towards the top. Here are some other countries that are towards the top. El Salvador, Costa Rica, other Central American countries, some Central African nations. And this puzzled people. You're like, whoa, hold on a second. Why are you happy? Right now, typically we wouldn't ask, why do you want to be happy? But given their situations and their circumstances, to claim that they're happy does seem a bit odd. In El Salvador, the gangs are so prominent that you fear for your physical safety almost constantly. Same in many nations in Central Africa. Why are you happy? I'm not dead. I had food to eat today. I'm still alive. Bam, we'll call it a good day. It's about lowered expectations. Subjective determination of happiness is one way of doing it. That's the virtue ethics way. Deontology is not concerned about happiness because of that subjective nature. But here's what the World Health Organization does. They have a list of objective criteria to determine happiness. And it's really not determining happiness. It's really determining best. But that would be extremely offensive to a whole lot of countries if you were to say these are the 10 best countries in the world instead of the 10 happiest countries. Here's some of the criteria. How environmentally sustainable are they now and in the future? Right? Will there be future generations in this place? How economically equitable is it? How accessible to the government and to policy making is everyone? There's a list of, I believe, 6 or 7 of these. And all of them have to do with how open for ideas from everyone, and how open is it for the possibilities of success for everyone. Everyone, everyone, everyone. You can't segment out a certain peoples. That's unethical given Kant's system. You can't say, well, these folks should be educated, these folks shouldn't. Unethical. You're making exceptions. It's got to apply to everyone if it's ethical. Everyone, everywhere, all of the time. So this Veil of Ignorance by John Rawls gets at that same idea, this veil of ignorance. Everyone is entitled to all of their rights without distinction of any kind. And what's interesting is Kant will actually go on to say that because we all have the same capacity to reason, the same reasoning process, that ethics should be the same everywhere, all the time, for everyone. And if they're not, if there are certain cultures that aren't doing that, then even those cultures themselves know intellectually that they're being unethical. If they go back through the reasoning process, which I'll give you here in just a little bit, probably the next video, maybe even the video after that, we'll see. There's probably going to be a lot of videos about Kant, because it is so precise, and because it is really quite the contrast to all that we've talked about up to this point. And in many ways, a whole lot of ethical reaction is to and against Kantian ethics. If you remember the trolley problem, the whole point of the trolley problem is to put Kantian ethics into a bind. If you've seen the Good Place episode about the trolley problem, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Chidi is Kantian. His dissertation while on Earth was on deontology and Kantian ethics. That's why he has no answer to the trolley problem. Because we're about universalizing. Every action in the trolley problem results in death. So every choice, you're really universalizing death. That's unethical. You can't make exceptions. You can't weigh, well, it's 5 versus 1. No. Remember, it's the light switch. There's ethical, there's unethical. It's the lesser of two evils. Aha, so you've already admitted that they're both evil. That they're both actually unethical, would say the Kantian. Just a few more of the universal rights here. Everyone has the right to life and liberty and the security of personhood. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. No one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. And it goes on and on like this. Everyone's and no one's. Universal. I'll wrap up this video by mentioning this. And that's where I'll start the next video. The first formulation of the categorical imperative is really a detailed explanation of what it means to universalize your action. You should will, volition and so forth, will that your action become a universal law. That by acting in a certain way, what you're really saying is, it would be a better world if everyone else did this too. It's going to be more rigorous than the golden rule. And not that he with the most gold makes the rules. That's a different golden rule. The golden rule from Judaism and Christianity. What does it? Treat everyone as you yourself would want to be treated. Notice how self-interested that is. I treat everyone else the way that I would want to be treated. Notice also how feelings it is, how I want to be treated, my own desires. Categorical imperative is more rigorous than that. It's not a matter of how you want to be treated. It's a matter of how everyone should be treated, which may actually be more demanding, more respectful, more dignified than the way that you want to be treated. There are people out there who enjoy hurting other people. Using the golden rule, they can be justified in doing so if they also want to be hurt. There are people out there who don't consider themselves worthy, who don't have self-dignity. So they don't want to treat themselves well. Therefore, they wouldn't have to treat anyone else very well either, if we're going with the golden rule instead of what Kant is going to give us instead. See you next time.